anytime you start a new project, even if it's something just for yourself, you want to have a particular goal in mind. At least it's nice to. And with this painting, what I really had in mind was page design more than anything else. I follow some different artists. Actually, I follow quite a few artists on YouTube, and several of them, what I really like about their work is they're very often more sketch artists, and they'll go out and just in the city or suburbs, wherever they're at, and do all these wonderful sketches. But what I really admire is not just the individual sketches themselves, but how wonderfully they compose their pages. And I'll see how they'll take individual elements, and even though they're sketching on the spot, they'll come in and they'll arrange each element as they're working in a very pleasing manner. And I wanted to do that with this. I wanted to make this sort of like if I were sketching out in the wild, but also sort of designing it as I would if I were being asked to do an illustration of for a travel brochure or something. Um, anyway, so I worked on combining the elements of the animals and the different texts, and then a little bit of abstract design in the background. And when we get to it, we'll talk about fonts a little bit because I love fonts. I love text. Right now, what I'm working on is with the giraffe, watercolor on Canson Montval paper and a little bit of casein to either refine the edges of the animal or to pop out some highlights. On the hippopotamus, I'm working on the silhouette and just trying to have a base color that's got a lot of texture, variety, and color so that it's just as an abstract shape, it's colorful and pleasing to look at. And I'm not worried about that if the color from the hippo runs down into the color of the water, doesn't matter. A lot of it's going to get covered, but even that doesn't, it's going to kind of help to tie the different elements together. And now I'm coming in. It's ideally with a watercolor, if you can get away with 3 passes, that's your goal as far as I'm concerned. So you'll have 1 pass as the block in, like that initial silhouette that I did. The second pass would be defining your large shadow shapes, and then the third pass would be either picking out deep darks or some highlights. That doesn't always work out. You wind up over rendering, or things just aren't turning out the way you want to, so you have to go in and do a little more blending and maybe do a little bit more of a pass. But the goal for something like this to me is always try to make the statement as quickly, as definitively as possible. And if you get past 3 passes, then you're probably muddling things up a little bit. And I will say, I know I'm working on Canson Montval, even though I did this painting a while back, because of the way the paint is sort of floating on the surface. Canson is a more cellulose. It's not, doesn't have a very high rag content, so the color doesn't seep into the paper, absorb into the fibers, like, say, an Arches or a Langton, a Gemini, Strathmore Gemini. That's another paper I like a great deal. But those are all 100% rag, if I'm remembering correctly. So they're real absorbent and they stay wet for a long time. It doesn't on Canson. It dries relatively quickly, and so there's the tendency to have harder edges. So you really want to get your blending done as quickly as possible. But it is nice working on this paper out in the wild because it does dry so quickly, so it allows you to do a lot of techniques relatively quickly. And you'll see, but one thing that is nice about this, you can see where I'm scrubbing in certain areas. You can lift a lot of color out of or off of Canson, and it's real easy to do because the paint again is sitting on the surface a little bit more, and so it's really relatively easy to take a brush and kind of lightly scrub it down to the back to the white paper just about. And it does allow you to soften edges quite a bit, so that's a positive. It's a nice little paper. It's not very expensive, so it's worth getting a pack if you're wanting to experiment and play. But it's not considered a professional paper, but that really doesn't matter to me one way or another. I like it and it works, and I use it for some things. So feel free to go out and try and experiment. I'm using just synthetic brushes with this one. Normally I paint a whole lot with Chinese calligraphy brushes, but in this particular instance, I think I mostly just used very inexpensive synthetic brushes. I don't remember the names. They're probably just relatively inexpensive brands that I picked up at Michael's, Hobby Lobby. Hobby Lobby has a lot of good sales, and they'll have like 40% off, 50% off sales. And if you can go and get them, I would encourage you to do so. I do buy brushes occasionally online. I get them from Jerry's Artorama and Utrecht and Dick Blick, and they're good companies. But I'm real hesitant to buy brushes online unless I actually have used that brand before, and I mean the exact number of that brand, because the numbering system's all over the place. You buy number 3 in one brand and it's 5 times bigger than the number 3 in another brand, and so you can get these brushes and you wind up with a lot of brushes you don't need because they're all the same size. So I like to actually have the brush in my hand when I buy it. You can also, they get bent and damaged, so when they're mailed. So I tend to like to actually have it in my hand and feel it and see if I can use it. And if I were spending a whole lot, like $100 or more for a brush, I would, if it was a watercolor brush, I would bring my watercolors to the store. I would not buy $100 brush online. I want to make sure it works. Now, in another video, I've talked about the watch that's hanging down. That's just for the camera to have something to focus in on. It's really hard, even for a very expensive camera, to focus on just white paper. So having that at the beginning to get a good established focus is really good. My paper is taped down to a board. I don't stretch my paper. I have, but honestly, I don't know. If you're using 150-pound or heavier paper, I don't really see as much need. I do get some buckling sometimes, and it can be a little bit of a pain, but for the most part, it's really not that bad. Honestly, I do so much work. It's just a pain for me to sit down and try to go through the process of stretching it and fussing with it. So I just tape it down and go. And if you look, I'm working on I think it's a black buck. And I just love when I paint and I do a silhouette because you just see what you're working with immediately. You don't have to take so much time to draw everything out real precisely and try to get your proportions right. Because with a big silhouette, you can see those proportions. It's so much easier to see the proportions. And I've found that I can do, oh my goodness, just about as accurate a drawing just doing a silhouette and carving into it as drawing out all the shapes and everything. Now that varies. Sometimes if I'm doing something really complex, and especially if I'm doing something for a magazine where I've got to fit into a specific area with a specific format, well then I'll do a drawing because I don't have a lot of forgiveness. It's got to go where it's got to go. And then also the editor may want to see something a little bit in progress. So, doing a sketch for them and then, building it up a little bit, you can kind of hold their hand a little bit and make sure that what you're doing is exactly what they want. Because when you're working with a magazine and they're on a deadline, they're not being obtuse or ugly. They just, you know, they've got to make sure that what they get from you is going to work exactly with the article or whatever that this is going to go with. And so they're already dealing with probably the writer and another editor or somebody. And so they've got a lot of different layers of people they've got to work with. So doing a more detailed drawing for them, it just helps make them feel better. And I like for all of my processes to be as easygoing as it can be. That way it just makes it more fun, more enjoyable. And then if something does come up, you can change it. It's a whole lot easier if you've done a little sketch, or even if you've done a detailed drawing. If they say, well, we want something changed, I'd rather change a detailed drawing than change a painting. So a little bit of a rabbit trail there, but that's just letting you know a little bit of my world. And you can see where on the black buck I got his back and his back leg a little bit too high, and so I just very carefully, or very easily rather, took and scrubbed on it and wiped it away, and no harm, no foul. Just move on, have fun. And you can see I'm constantly using the blow dryer. Love the blow dryer because it just speeds that process up and makes it where I can move on without any problem. And here's where I'll get my casein out and begin to refine and just get a few details and just tighten up a couple of places. I try not to be overly fussy with it because invariably the more you fuss with it, the worse it gets. And it's very interesting. I try to make myself take breaks every once in a while because I'll sit down and start painting and forget, and all of a sudden I've been painting for 2 hours and haven't moved. And it's real funny that I'll sometimes get up and walk around for just a minute, get a cup of coffee or something, and come back. And I think, where was I working? What was I doing? What was I struggling with? Because it looks fine. So that's another thing, is that if you are struggling with something, maybe you need to get out and get away from it for a minute, because it may be that what you're struggling with is not a problem. Something else is the problem. Or maybe nothing's the problem. Maybe you're just overthinking it. But regardless, getting away, letting yourself take a break, take a breath, is real, real nice. And this is a homemade easel. I need to make a video and show it in a little more detail and talk about what I did, because I built it. It's a modified James Gurney easel, and it's real nice. I've put, oh, I guess, if you will, many thousands of miles on it. I've traveled with it. I've used it. I did a book with the Mississippi governor and painted in the mansion, and I painted many paintings there, inside, outside, in the garden, in the I say antique rooms, in the old rooms. Just I've used it in the Mississippi Capitol. I've gone to the fair and into the woods. I've just gone everywhere with it, and it's real nice. And here now you can see where I'm working on the Cape Buffalo, and I've tried to put it where it's sort of silhouetting the giraffe. And again, I'm working on designing the page. I'm not just thinking about any one individual element in the painting. I'm thinking about painting overall, so that when I put a new animal, new element in, then I'm thinking about, okay, now how does this one relate to everything else? Where would be the best place to position it? And of course, I'm working, doing the second pass, trying to do the shadow shapes. And it, again, it's just so amazing that if you get a silhouette down and you put down just the shadow shapes, all of a sudden you've got just an amazing three-dimensional looking element, whatever you're painting. And then coming in on your third pass and allowing that to be more just popping highlights, you can do a lot very, very quickly. Now, again, I mean, I freely admit I can get bogged down. That black buck you saw, I really sort of fussed around with it for a while, trying to get his back and his back leg correct, and probably spent more time on it than I should, but hindsight and all that. And now I've started doing some of the calligraphy type work. And first thing that I did was using a pencil to block in what I wanted, get the letters where they're in the right shape and size and proportion with one another, and just make sure that they start and end where I want them to. What I'm actually using is watercolor paint. I've got a dip pen. It's a pretty good size. It's probably a 4 or 5, I don't remember. But you can see that I'll go in and make the stroke and then dab into it to give it some texture, give it some volume, some gradation. It just looks really nice to do that. And I'm not a calligrapher or anything like that, but it's a being able to handle calligraphy pens, being able to do some calligraphy is a good skill. I recommend it for anybody, even if you're not an illustrator. It's just something that can increase your skills, just make you a better artist. I encourage artists to experiment and play with anything. I can't imagine working in one medium, one style all the time. I would just be bored to tears. So that's where I love what I do. I love the illustration work I do because I'm called on to do just all sorts of things. I encourage artists to experiment and play with anything. I can't imagine working in one medium, one style all the time. I would just be bored to tears. So that's where I love what I do. I love the illustration work I do because I'm called on to do just all sorts of things. The pen that I'm using here, it's called an Accurate. They're real inexpensive, light fast India ink pens. And supposedly are 100% light fast. You can get real expensive ones, but I think I got these either from Jerry's or Dick Blick, something like that, and they were $1 a piece. And if you're going to use them, that's what I would recommend, because there's no sense in buying one for $3 when you can buy one for $1. Here again, you can see I'm using a pencil to really map out exactly where I want the word to be. Not again, not being a calligrapher, it's more of a challenge for me. I'm not just totally conversational with all of the letter forms, so I have to do a little bit more planning out as to what I'm going to do. Okay, well, I started looking at this and thought, I don't like that empty space between the giraffe and the hippo. So I just got to thinking, well, what do I want to put back there? What would work? I didn't want to do another animal or anything like that. I felt like that would just be too busy and nothing would really fit. And then it hit me, oh, those beautiful African prints. These are African animals. Find a real pretty African print. And so that's what I did. I went onto the internet, started looking around at different images, and I probably just typed in African prints and found some beautiful fabric and just went in and found one that I thought would work color wise and pattern wise, and just copied it and brought it into the composition. And I was real pleased with how it added that third element. So you got the animals, you got this pattern, and you've got the different fonts in the calligraphy. So that was real nice. This was a real fun little project for an afternoon. I try to do these whenever I can. I do a lot of projects, and I get real busy with editorial type work where I might be working for a magazine or something, and after doing that for a few weeks, I'm real tired. It really, when you're trying to get a lot of illustrations out in a short period of time, I can be doing like an illustration a day for a week or two, and it's just, you got to get it out, get it out, get it out. and afterwards you're drained mentally and physically. And so it's real nice to come into the studio and just kind of play and have fun. And you're not on a deadline. Nobody's breathing down your neck about anything, and it's just for you. And this is a wonderful way, like I was talking about earlier, to experiment and play with different techniques and medias that you don't know. You don't know if an assignment may come up where that skill is exactly what would make your illustration that much better. And that's helped me in getting a lot of work, because there are a lot of artists who they're real good, but they're only able to do maybe one medium or one style. And that's not me. I can do pretty much any style and any technique and any medium. And that's not bragging. It's just that's just the way I work. I think I've maybe in this video, maybe another, I've said I get bored. I don't want to work super loose all the time. I don't want to work super tight all the time. I don't want to do watercolors. I don't want to do oils all the time. After a couple of months of one thing, I want to do something else. And so playing with these different techniques is a way for me to stay mentally alert, curious, and focused, and just gives me this wonderful bag of tricks that I can pull out whenever an editor wants something. I can come out and do that extra mile and give them something they weren't expecting. All right, well, I think that's about wraps that up for this painting. I hope you enjoyed it. If you've enjoyed this episode of The Arthropologist, please hit the like button. And if you'd like to see more episodes like this, think about subscribing. I'm Bill Wilson, and I'm The Arthropologist.